Okay, so we had just asked the question yesterday, can the neighbors prevent a tenant from moving in? In other words, one of the owners of the condos in the building is moving out. He wants to rent out his apartment, his condo, and the neighbors are not happy with the level of observance of the tenant that he wishes to bring in, and they wish to force an eviction. So, Kosav Hakna, and he says that they're not Shomer Shabbos, and the women of the family are not Sneas, and that's the reason that they present. So the tshuva of Rav Sharaga is as follows: Katav HaKnesset HaGedolah, that this is an early commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, that Yecholim Hashchenim La'akev Shelo Yaskir Chatzero L'Shachen Ra V'Kol Shekain Lukuti, that neighbors do have the authority to prevent a bad neighbor from moving in, and they certainly have the right to say that we don't want a kuti to come in. Now, kuti is usually translated as a Samaritan, but it refers to non-Jewish residents of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so umekaro tahor mitshuvot hageonim, and the Knesset Hagdolah's source, he has a pure source for this, from a tshuva from the Gaonic period, shenishalu sham mahadin lahaskirit beito la'akum shuhulo anas. The question that was asked, one of the neighbors wants to, there goes the neighborhood. One of the neighbors wants to rent out his house to a non-Jew, but an akum, a heathen. He's not a bad person. He's not a forceful person that's going to wreak havoc on the neighbors. They just don't want a heathen among them. Veheshivu destam akum anasu v'yecholin b'nei hashchuna la'akev milahushivo b'neiha. And the response was that you can't assume when you're dealing with a heathen that he's not going to wreak havoc. You have to assume that he is going to wreak havoc, even though he comes across as a very refined person. And this is now the period of the Gaonim, is before the year 1000 of the Common Era, approximately. Okay? So it's between around the years 700 to 1000, roughly. Okay? Va'afilu Yisrael shochen ra she'eno noach lahem yecholim la'akev v'kol shekein akum. He says, if even a Jew who's considered to be a bad neighbor, permission is granted for you to prevent him from moving in, you can certainly prevent an akum from moving in. Omnam, however, now with that said, it seems to be pretty open and shut, right? Ha'amim rabot shekain chiloni sheba lagor bevinyan shel datiyim v'roe et orach hachayim shelahem. So he says, but there are also many times, you need to consider this, that a chiloni who comes to live in a religious area, he sees the way of life of his neighbors. He sees their children behaving in a more refined way. He sees the Shabbos table of his neighbors. Then that neighbor will become strengthened in his religious observance. And through that, he'll be able to become a Baal Tshuva. And therefore, there is a good argument to be made that you should not prevent this family, this non-religious family, the women wear pants and tank tops, from moving into the neighborhood. But when is this true? When they're not going to create a disturbance for others. But if they're going to be a disturbance, a nuisance to the neighbors through their conduct, such as they wear pants and tank tops, or they wear offensive clothing, or or there's a fear that instead of them being the influenced, they'll have a negative influence about on the other residents. Zechutam shel hashchenim lehitnaged. Then the neighbors do have a right to oppose this tendency. V'lo rak sheyicholim lehitnaged shelo yaskir lahem et hadira. He says not only do they have the right to oppose this person renting them, the owner to rent out his apartment to them, they can even prevent him from selling the apartment to a non-religious person. Yeah, right, which is really surprising, because have they already moved in? Is this before the fact? Is this after the fact? It's a little bit ambiguous, right? I agree with you. There's no way to determine. That's also there's a lot of ambiguity in this kind of response. On the one hand, maybe let them in because you'll be able to be makarev them, but on the other hand, they're creating a nuisance, so that the neighbors have a right. But how do you know? How, like, what if there's a policy in the neighborhood? Anyone with a TV can't come into our neighborhood. Well, let the people with the TV come in. Maybe you'll have a positive influence and they'll realize life without a TV is actually a machaya, right? So you're right. It's a bit dissatisfying, this so far what we've seen in the tshuva, because there's so much that's not really clarified in this idea. Okay, now let us continue. Kol shekain im ze b'kirya shenivneta al yedei amutot datiyot ukahal hayad hu rak ledatiyim. This is even more true as far as the neighbor's right to prevent a non-observant tenant coming in. If the entire neighborhood was built by a religious corporation with the objective of this being a planned community for, let's say, a Haredi clientele, let's say Beitar Elite, which was really, it was a planned community for the Haredi, for a Haredi group of people. There's so many other communities like that, Moshav Matityahu, but other places are like that. Other neighborhoods that certainly Mea Sharim, right, right, but that wasn't the planned community that's been there since the founding of the state. But what else am I? Kiryat Sanz and Netanya and so forth. Sha'asur limkor la'adam sheyachol lahazik lahem, and in that case, it would be usur for any one tenant to sell his apartment to someone who could be, harmful to that religious, hermetically sealed community. The kol shekain shechatzter hamadregot v'hagina v'hachatzerot yesh lahem din rechush meshutaf. And this is certainly true about any shared space. So if I provide tenancy to someone who in the shared space where everyone has an equal partnership in that shared space, the hallways, the gardens, and the courtyards and so forth, and therefore it is within the neighbor's rights, I guess a majority would probably be required, to block the tenancy of someone who they don't want to live there. So he says in the footnote, Ayin B'shut Baruch Omer, Shehevi Rabbeinu Hagon Shlita, Et Lashon HaChazak, Shekol Binyan Chutz Mehadirot Atzmam, Im Rachush Meshutaf Shel Kol Hadayarim Ayin Sham. And another sefer, Rav Sharaga, had written that the entire building outside of the individual apartments is equally shared in a partnership arrangement by all of the tenants. It is equal. It is a shared ownership, and it's a partnership corporation of all the tenants. Ve'al pizeh kosav Rabbeinu Hagon HaMechaber Shlita, sheyicholim hashchenim lihitnaged shelo yimkor dirato lemi she'eino shomer Torah u'mitzvos. And it's on that basis that they can block, the neighbors can block someone from being able, from selling his apartment to someone who's not shomer Torah mitzvahs, because part of that sale involves their property. Because when you sell your apartment, you're also selling your share in the shared space. And these two other svarim write the same thing. However, it needs a little bit more analysis. The hamavur b'sma lahedja diyachol shutaf limkor chelko afilu ba'oto bayit gamim shutafo mitnaged lemechirato ha'in sham. He says, because the Sma, one of the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, writes explicitly that I have a right, if I share a space with someone, we share a common area, or we share an apartment together, I have a right to sell my portion, or my portion of the ownership of that shared space, to whomever I wish, even if I don't get the consent of the other party. I don't have to consult with you. If I want to share my portion of ownership of this shared space, I have a right to do so. So why can't I sell my apartment to another person without getting the consent of all of the other neighbors? So what? I'm just selling my share of the shared space. And this is true everywhere in the world. We never find that there is this ability for neighbors to block the sale of a person's apartment. And the fact is that that's Rav Bloy's position, in Pischei Choshen, that he disagrees with Rav Sharaga, and he feels that it is permissible for a neighbor to sell his apartment to whomever he wishes, regardless of the protests of the neighbors, because of Sham, shekain kasav hamishpat shalom v'hochiach kein midivrei harama. And he proves it from the words of the Rama. And so the question is, we have on the one hand the Knesset Hagdola, who says that you can block tenancy and residency from a person who you feel is going to be a bad neighbor. But on the other hand, we also find the Sma is of the opinion that a person can sell whatever, he can sell his own private space, and he can even sell his share in a shared space. So how do you reconcile that? The Al-Korchach Nira, the Kavanat Rabbeinu Hagon HaMechaber Shlita, the Kotav Chaverav, the Kosav Dvarav Davka, the Gabe Kirya Shenivnata Al Dat Sheyaguru Shamrak Anashim Shomrei Torah Mitzvot. He says it seems that Rav Sharaga would really his halacha would only be true in a situation where the entire neighborhood was built specifically for residency of observant Jews. Vim kain kol mi shekana sham dira asa kain al dad zeh sheyuchal limkor dirato rak lemishu shomer Torah u'mitzvot. And therefore, it was implicit when you purchased your apartment that you would only sell when you want to vacate to someone who is shomer Torah mitzvahs. V'havi ki'ilu hitnu al zeh lehedja b'sha'at ha'mechira. And it's as if this was an explicit condition of your purchase of the apartment at the very outset. But if that's not the case, then it seems like Rav Sharaga's position would not be sustainable. And therefore, it is only in that situation where the neighbors can oppose and prevent a person from providing tenancy or selling his apartment to someone who's not shomer Torah mitzvahs, and that's especially so because of the shared space that they all share together. This is really not simple. I think that Mirz Hashem, when I get back home, I'd like to pull out that snippet from the Pischei Choshen and look at it carefully, because we're looking at two completely opposing opinions in halacha. One opinion is that of Rav Sharaga, who says that the neighbors can oppose the tendency of someone who's not Shomer Torah mitzvahs, and he equivocates and he says, but if you feel that you could be makarev the family, then you shouldn't oppose it, right? And on the other hand, you have Rav Bloy in the Pischei Choshen, who's a huge posek, was a huge posek, who says that no, you can't oppose uh, you can't oppose the tendency of anyone who wants to sell their apartment. It's their space, and they have every right to do with it as they wish. And they even can give over their whatever portion of ownership they have in the shared areas. They can give it or sell it to whomever they wish. Is there any such, are you aware of any statute in secular law preventing someone from?
And you get also because then you get partition sale. You and I own a joint property, and you want to sell it to my uncle, and I oppose it. Then you can go to court and ask the court to partition or sell it for you. The other in opposite, in the case of the opposition of your co-owner. So I think there's some exceptions like prejudice or something really bad is going to happen. It's kind of unclear also.
Things like no pets.
And they still have that kind of stuff. Yeah, if everybody agrees when it first starts, it's like that thing when it first starts, it's established that way. And maybe condo rules.
Right. Although, so this would only apply when the community was started with these policies. But it could happen that a community becomes more religious over the course of years. I've seen that happen in Israel, for example. What? Apparently so. In other words, what rights if I'm a private condo owner and I purchased this condo without that, and there was no condo association. Um, if there was a condo association and I signed that I have to follow the policies of the condo association, and the condo association changes its policies, so then I am stuck, right? But yeah,
That influence on community. It could be a carve some of them.
yeah.
Ownership is probably more liberal if you start to offer it. If you're in a rental building, for example, the landlord then could typically institute policies for the building and interview prospective tenants, and then probably could decide to accept or reject.
There's a lot of there has been historically a lot of resentment and bad feelings between this Chiloni and the religious. There's that term in Hebrew, a dos, um, a dos. I think they call it a dos. Have you ever heard that term? A dos is a religious Jew. I just heard a story, and it's basically they take the word dati or dat, and they use a Haredi pronunciation. It's derogatory, tados, right? And it's like a derogatory term for a religious Jew. There was a bumper sticker. I just read a story. I heard a story recently about a guy who got a flat tire on the road in Israel, and no one was stopping to help him until this one religious Jew pulled over, helped him, or he ran out of gas, And he said, here, I'm going to run down to the gas station. I'll bring you a jerry can of gas. Don't worry about it. Comes back. And the guy is so grateful. And he says, look, I feel terribly embarrassed. Look at the bumper sticker that I have. It said, Anido reis al kol das. I trample on every religious Jew. So he says, and they developed a friendship, and eventually he was, the Kurav was brought closer to Yiddishkeit. But yeah, yeah. But so this is really, this tshuva is really baked into Israeli culture and society as well. And it's a reflection of, the sad reality that religious and non-religious Jews are not able always to live side by side in the same community. You sort of wish it could be that way. On the one hand, you say to yourself, there's a certain benefit of an entire religious community being hermetically contained within their own community because they can close off the streets for Shabbos, and it's beautiful, and you don't have to worry about cars on Shabbos and things like that. You don't have to worry about television sets playing, and you don't have to worry about negative values for your kids. But on the other hand, wouldn't society be better off? Wouldn't Israeli society be better off if it was completely integrated between the religious and non-religious? Because that way, the Chiloni segment of society would be so much more influenced to come closer to tradition if there was more exposure to the religious elements of society. Yeah, 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 yeah. In certain neighborhoods, not in all neighborhoods. But there's different parts of Ramat Beit Shemesh. And certain parts of Ramat Beit Shemesh, there are mixed communities. And other parts of Beit Shemesh and Ramat Beit Shemesh, that they're exclusive communities. And you hear some of over the years we've heard some of those horror stories about, the bus that was driving through a certain community in Beit Shemesh, and it had what is it, like an ad on the side of the bus that they deemed to be inappropriate, and they basically vandalized the bus and all of that stuff.
Not if you go by, but any, like town, like people throw stones at your cars driving around through there.
Right. Yeah, there you. Yeah, so there's the positive and then there's the negative, and it all depends on what you choose to focus on, I suppose. Some of these very exclusive, very, very frum communities, and it can have oppressive rules. Like I remember maybe it was a dozen years ago, maybe 10 years ago, that there was this case of a woman who was trying just to walk her daughter to school. And it was in Beit Shemesh, and the Hasidic kids were spitting at her or something because what I don't even remember what the issue was maybe she was dressed in an Orthodox fashion, but not Orthodox enough for them, because maybe she wasn't wearing stockings. I don't know, who knew. I don't even remember what the issue was. So, there's beautiful elements and there's the not beautiful elements, and it all depends on what you focus on. So, but again, my point is that this tshuva is a reflection of the makeup of Israeli society. I mean, I can't imagine this Shiloh would never come up in Toronto. Don't think. I don't think this Shiloh would ever come up in any neighborhood, except maybe Williamsburg. But even in Williamsburg, or Square Town, which is really one of those exclusive planned communities, then I think it might theoretically it might come out. It might come up. Okay. But I do want to follow up on this, Billy Netter. I'll try and remember. Okay, Siman Lamed Zayin. Itztarfut dayar lahotzaot chashmal kishalo neheneh. Okay, what is a neighbor's responsibility to help pitch in or chip in for electricity costs when he has not benefited? So from the utilities. Okay, so here's the issue. Ani gar b'koma rishona b'vinyan ben sheish komot. I live in an apartment building. I'm on the first floor of a sixth floor apartment building. V'lo mishtamesh bo'or shel cheder hamadregot kim'at me'achar v'yesh li or me'harechov. I never use the light that's coming from the stairwell. The lights in the stairwell. I don't use that because I have light from the street. Ki haknisa l'dirati smucha lepetach habinyan. Because the door to my apartment is right by the street. So the only utility expense that is shared by the neighbors is the upkeep of the electric bill that is paid for the lights in the stairwell. Do I have to pay for that as well, since I'm not benefiting from the lights that are being left on in the stairwell? I don't need those lights. I have plenty of light coming in from the street. I'm sure there's a way to expand this question to other situations as well, but I mean, I don't even see the shilas so much. I mean, it's probably implicit that when you choose to purchase this apartment, you have to pay for all of the shared space expenses, the common area expenses.
Public corporation, supplies the climate changes. You pay for TV. Costs.
Yeah,
Don't use the TV.
yeah. Let's say you don't want the fiber optic cables. Yeah. You don't have a car. There you go. All right. So are there rules about that? Yeah. Yeah. Seems pretty open and shut, right? So
There's quite a few, there's separate metering for individual units as well. So previously it was the whole building used to get the assessments on the utility companies used to come by building. Now developers put separate meters in so at least that's measured for you.
I see. I see.
But the rest of the common area stuff is shared amongst them.
Right. That's when you're living in an apartment, right, where you don't pay for utilities, right? Yeah.
I get the
Uh-huh.
common area stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Not common conduct. Read the whole thing out there. Yeah.
Pay for certain types of expenses or overhead or whatever, it has to be stipulated.
Right. Has to be right. So for example, a lot of times you'll be able to rent an apartment and you have to pay extra for a parking space. And if you say you don't have a car, you don't pay for it. It's like in Manhattan, you pay a premium just for the parking space.
Myself in my business, our building has like 6 different tenants, and everybody has their garbage included. I don't. I just negotiate my lease that way, so I'm separate from everybody else in the building.
So what do you do with your
So I
garbage?
pay for my own garbage.
Just curious, why did you do it that way?
Because I was pushing down on the cost of the rental lease, so that was something that I, right from the beginning, that I took on to do that, to take care of the garbage. It was like a negotiation, part of my lease.
And did it end up turning out cheaper for you?
I think it did. And at the beginning, it certainly did.
Okay, we're gonna regroup on Tuesday, Hashem, because Monday's January 1st. And have a wonderful Shabbos and a nice weekend. Happy secular New Year. See you soon.